What's going on, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls? This is the Two Chaps Pod. He's Coleman, and I'm AJ, and today is the day before Veterans Day.
Yeah.
November 11th, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of World War I, the war to end all wars, ended. And it became recognized as Veterans Day. So today we salute the veterans and recognize them, and it's going to be a show that discusses and talks about the military, Veterans Day, and, as we are two chaplains, our service as well. So, Coleman,
Yeah.
Veterans Day. What does Veterans Day mean to you as someone who's been overseas?
Well, so veterans are, so there's the distinction between Memorial Day, 4th of July, and Veterans Day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's important to keep in mind that, Veterans Day is about those who have served and really are still currently serving in, as, many who are in right now have deployed numerous times and in service to the country in various capacities. So it is a moment to reflect on, okay, kind of where the present state of the military is, and the present, those who are still in our midst that are serving and have served, and remembering that, and kind of as Memorial Day looks more towards the past, this looks towards the here and now and the future, and the legacy that we want to leave as those who have served. That's in one of, as well, it's in probably several of the creeds, but in the Army. But I remember from the Special Forces creed that it's, I serve with the memory of those who have gone before me, and I will do everything to uphold their legacy. And so I think that that's part of what Veterans Day does, is remembers, yep, we are part of something greater than ourselves and have served in this capacity, and it is to defend the greatest country in the world. I mean, or at least the ideals of the greatest country in the world. And I think it's also a kind of a humbling experience, because you realize that, like, you're not alone in this, which is a something that I think needs to be said more and more about veterans. I think that becomes a big, and why this day is important. I think many of the guys, they did their time, and they kind of go, was it worth it? Was it, did I do the right thing? All that stuff. And Veterans Day is a moment to say, yes, you did what was required of you, and you served honorably, hopefully. I mean, there are those that screw that up, and you paid a price that not everyone else was willing to pay, and you paid it so that they could do whatever they were doing, or that they're going to do. So I think there's a moment of reflection, of humbling, and of encouragement that comes with it, that we ought to partake in and recognize, and especially for those guys that get to the point where they question, what's life about, what's, especially if they've retired and things like that, that you have done something good. I think that's what the day is trying to evoke. And I say that's important, because we were talking about this kind of off air, the reality of suicide that has plagued veterans. And it is to realize that, and this kind of ties into a little bit of what we talked, piece on All Saints Day, if you go to Uncultured Dad and check that out, about we're not alone. So just as the church is not alone, and a Christian is never alone, so also veterans are not alone. And it's finding ways to connect to them, with them and to help them through any issues that are going on. And I think that November 11th gives us an opportunity to reflect on that. But
yeah, I think so too, and I think it's very important to like define like what a veteran is, right? In a lot of ways, there are classifications in the way that they've described veterans, but I don't feel like it's wrong to honor all military members on November 11th. Even though technically a veteran, the simplest way I've heard it is you've either fulfilled a contract or have served overseas, is the way that it was described to me, which technically means I'm not even a veteran yet because my first contract's not up and I haven't served overseas. But still, even if there is that distinction, there's nothing wrong with honoring our military on this given day and saying, thank you for what you've done. And I know that it can sometimes be a joke in a lot of ways, and I don't want to make light of it, but the whole thank you for your service.
Right.
When somebody sees you in uniform or whatever the case may be. But that is important, and as dads, I think it's also important that we kind of train our sons to have that honor and that respect for those that are willing to selflessly sacrifice for the ideals of, like you said, the greatest country in the world, which we firmly believe. America is the greatest country in the world. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. Just like we love the church, but the church as a whole is not perfect either. There are perfect elements of it, and the head of it is perfect. But even though something isn't perfect doesn't mean that it can't be great. And when we're talking about the Constitution of the United States, the Declaration of Independence, and how important those ideals are for even the basic human decency, it's the ideals are unmatched. And for those that would, literally take an oath to protect and defend it from all enemies, foreign and domestic, there should be honor in that.
There was a quote just in what you said that I read last week. I want to say it was Mark Twain. Maybe you can look this up for me. I don't know, but it was the enemy of the enemy of greatness is perfection. But it was something that I saw earlier this week, and it relates to what you're describing about the United States, and that this doesn't have to be the perfect place, but it is a good place, a great place. So, yeah.
I'm looking up that quote for you.
Yeah, thanks. And it's interesting that you also bring up the church in that regard too. We talk about, like, I don't know if you guys just make these distinctions or what, but they're kind of euphemisms that we use, and they're actually in our hymnal as distinctions. But we talk about the church triumphant and the church militant. And the church triumphant are all those who have died and gone on to be with the Lord, that are resting from their labors now, resting in the presence of Christ. And so they're triumphant, they're in heaven, and they're awaiting the day of the resurrection. Whereas those who are here on earth are still the church militant, meaning that although the victory is won, and although our victory is guaranteed in Christ, we are still suffering through the effects of sin and through the effects of death and those things. So it is a struggle to fight against those things, and so that's the militant side of it. But yeah, the and on this side, within the church militant, there are still imperfections, because everyone that comes through the door of the church is a sinner. Now, They might be a redeemed sinner and a forgiven sinner, but they are still a sinner.
Correct.
And that
and they're still waging war and being militant against the flesh.
Correct. Exactly. So, that's an important thing to remember. But there is that promise that one day, and this is what we actually confess this in the ancient creeds, the ecumenical creeds, that there is one holy Christian or Catholic and apostolic church. And that's and why it's important, because that's a confession. It is a belief that we have about what Christ is doing in the church, that there will be one day when we see this one holy Christian and apostolic church in its fullness, at the end of all time, with the myriads of people from all different tribes, tongues, and languages gathered around the throne, where there will no longer be the divisions that we have here on earth. And that is a glorious picture to look at. So,
to circle back to your quote,
yeah,
here's what I could find. Perfection is the enemy of progress, by Winston Churchill.
Okay.
Good is the enemy of great, from Jim Collins. And Voltaire has a saying that says, the best is the enemy of the good.
Okay.
So I don't know where you read that, or you'll have to find it, and then we'll have to put it out and say, this is what Coleman was talking about when he lost his mind on the podcast.
Or it'll be one of those, quotes that are like, nobody ever really said it, but we always attributed it to somebody, and now it's just, we just assume they say it.
Like, for instance, and this fits in with Veterans Day, you've heard the saying, soft times create hard men. Hard men create soft times, right?
Yeah,
or a version,
a variation of it.
Yeah. So that, because I was looking at that one time because I was going to write about it, and I was like, who said that? Because that's like a very groundbreaking, like it's a very good thought. And I was reading something from like a Harvard review or something, and it was like, that saying is actually from a science fiction book. And I was like, that's interesting. Like, it wasn't some grand moral philosopher that came up with this, or some military general that came up with this, but yeah, very interesting. Back to Veterans Day. So when we talk about like what it means to you, I still consider myself fresh when it comes to things of the Army, right? And I don't think I hope and pray that it never goes away, but there's, like, when I button my uniform, I feel a sense of pride, right? Still.
Yeah.
And I know that my wife and my family does too. But we haven't lived kind of like the Army life, if you will, like most people have. I've been a reservist my entire time, which means once a month and a few weeks out of the year that we're training, that we're, as some people so affectionately say, playing Army.
Yeah.
But it still means something because of what we have vowed to protect and serve.
Yeah.
Right? And I feel like in today's day and age, that does get lost a little bit. And, with the amount of anti-American rhetoric and people assuming that just because something's not perfect, it's not good.
Yeah.
Right? Again, the enemy of good is perfect. And the language that gets tossed around and talked about. My uncle served during Vietnam. And pretty sure, like, having gone through like the chaplain studies I did and my graduate degree and all of that and the counseling that we did, pretty sure he had some type of PTSD, moral injury, something, because I mean he did nothing when he came back, basically. But I think about the guys that served with him that were coming back and having witnessed what they've witnessed, and then were treated the way in which they were treated when they came back, seeing the American flag being burned, and which, sure, First Amendment right to free speech,
Yeah.
you can do that, but
Mm-hmm.
you're literally burning the symbol that gives you the right to do that.
Right.
There's some bit of irony in
Yeah.
that whole display. And I don't care really where you fall on the political side of things. I don't really care where you fall on the ideological side of things. The reality is that the men and women who choose to put on the uniform and stand on the front lines in your place to ensure that you have the freedoms to disparage them when they come home, they deserve your respect. They
Yeah.
deserve your honor.
Yeah.
Whether you agree with war or not, whether you agree with the American government or not, it does not matter. The men and women who say, I vow to protect the Constitution of the United States, which includes your right to free speech against all enemies, foreign and domestic, they deserve respect and honor, which is why I appreciate, dads bringing their kids and saying, hey, thanks for your service, like teaching them the right way to respect military personnel.
Yeah. And that's even like, I know it gets, when the NFL does, its salute to service, and college football does their salute to service, there's always this kind of like, okay,
It's commercialized.
Yeah. But there is a sense of, okay, that's good because it is still recognized as, yep, this is something, what those service members have chosen to do is something different than what a lot of others have chosen to do. And it's not to say that that's better or worse, but it's not to compare them, but it's to say this is a job that needs to be done. And because right now we're still an all volunteer military force, they have volunteered to do it. They have said,
correct,
this is the role that I'm going to take. And I, that is, you have to, it's like what we talk about in the military. You don't have to like the person who has the rank, but you have to respect the rank. And it's a parallel to that of, you don't have to like the things that we're involved in. There are some things that I question a lot of, but at the same time, we have to respect that this is what they are carrying out and they are choosing to do, and that is, and that others have they have filled the shoes for, again, in that legacy, and that's also a challenge for us who do put on the uniform, that we actually, and we talk, this is in one of our Army doctrine publications, that we carry out these things with with honor and with dignity, and so that the people whom we serve respect us and trust us, because that's the other side of this.
correct.
And that's, again, what our Army publications talk about is the bedrock of our profession is trust, and that includes trust with the American public, so that when because it's their money that funds us,
Correct.
ultimately, but that they know that when we step into those roles, and that when we go overseas to do what we're doing, that this is for their good. It is a service to them and for them, and not only for them, but for the generations to come after it. So yeah, there's a mutual, as much as we should be respected, as veterans should be respected, there's also, we have to uphold what it is that garners that respect.
Exactly. Yeah. But we say that for veterans, but the same is true for manhood, for being a husband, for being a dad, for being if you want to be someone who is respected, then you have to be somebody who is respectable.
Yeah.
Right?
That's true.
if you want to lead, you have to be worthy to be followed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? John Maxwell, in his 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, he says, if you think you're a leader, but are, what's the exact, I forget the exact quote, but it's something to the effect of, you may think you're a leader, but if you're not worthy to be followed, all you're doing is just walking. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it's true, and it has far-reaching, I mean, application across all facets of life, and that's one of the things, and it was one of the questions I was going to ask you that we could get into tonight. But like, how has your military service? You remind me again. You were in college and signed up.
I'd graduated
You had
college.
graduated college and signed up.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had your bachelor's degree. You signed up post 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
What year?
It was 2007. Yeah.
Okay. So 2007, you graduated college, you signed up.
Or-
How has the military impacted your life?
Oh man.
Like, not, I mean, I know it's impacted it on, I'm
Right.
speaking more in the grandiose, like.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because the military becomes your life, so it is.
Correct.
Especially
when you're active
when I
duty,
was
which
active
you
duty.
were for
8 years.
8.
Yeah. So I mean, there's all
And
the.
I'm going to reiterate, you were special forces, so it was like even different than regular active duty, I would assume.
Yeah, it was. So yeah, I think that one of the, and this is still kind of one of the beautiful things of the Army, at least, or the military, is that how it is structured. And so you start to see, like, because there is a pattern to it. It's an institution, so it's not like somebody just came up with this. It has been, our military has been around for 225, 250 years, depending on how you want to date certain things. But that the concept of a military has been around, for almost, since the earth was populated enough to have it. And so you realize that there are things about it, that the structure and authority and the frameworks by which you say it is, and how you kind of approach life that are embedded into you. That's actually, like, there's something good about that, because it does draw you outside of yourself, or at least that's the intent.
Mm-hmm.
Because you begin to realize you are not, you are an individual, but you are, as you enter into the military, you are committing to something that is not individual.
Correct.
It is your again, service is for the people that you love behind you, the country that you love behind you. That's going back to the Tolkien quote that you always say. But then also to the guys to your left and your right that you build these relationships with over time. And that, that there is something positive about that. Now, what I would say, that there can be a negative to that when you try to move from that life back into regular life, civilian life, and not everything goes the way that you think it should. I mean, when somebody messes up in the military, there's action taken against that. We're going to correct these things. Sometimes it's absurd, but sometimes it's very necessary. In civilian life, it doesn't always work that way, and you're just kind of like, this should be going this way. It should be, somebody gave an order, we should be following it, that type of thing. So that's the negative side of it. But I do think positively, the impact of the Army, of my life in the Army, is recognizing how those authority things work. And I bring that up also because that is something in the church that you realize that, I mean, there are a few people that Jesus marvels at their demonstration of faith. And one of them is the Roman centurion, who exactly describes how the military works. I tell my servant to go, and he goes, and I tell this one to come, and he comes. For I'm a man under authority, and I have those under my authority. And he's describing this in relation to Jesus' authority over all things, particularly the sickness of one of his servants. And that he recognizes this is how authority works. This is how God works. Because it's ultimately his word over everything. And he believes that this is who this Jesus is. And Jesus, again, marvels. And never in all of Israel have I seen faith like this. And so there's a transfer in that when the framework or the structure in the army, and you see all the things that go with that, and then you see the church and you go, there's an element of that in our following Jesus, that he is our Lord, that he gives the commands. And unlike the army, he will always take care of us. And I'm not criticizing the army or the U.S. government or any of that in this capacity, but I do know that the army cannot take care of all those who have served. It's just financially and medically and all those things that come with it. It is a huge task and very difficult to do. So that is the difference. Though Jesus says, "I will always take care of you." So that would be one huge thing I would take away.
Yeah, for me, there's a practical element to it, but then there's a very real, like, spiritual element to it. For me, the practical element, when Jess and I moved back to Michigan from Texas in 2018, our son was 1 year old, Jack was 1 year old, and we were like, we need to move back home. Our kid needs his grandparents, right? My mom and dad are up here. Her mom is up here as well. And so we moved back to Michigan. Jess still kept her job in Texas. I was looking for a new one and was kind of lost, to be honest with you, because my teaching certificate from Texas didn't transfer to Michigan, so I had to go through that process all over again. The only job that I could get was in a very bad situation and with very bad leadership. Kids, I will never blame kids, right? Kids are kids, and it's the adult's job to do the job and love them and teach them. But when the adults don't have the support of leadership, it makes that job that much worse, right?
Right.
And it was, I mean, you were in a classroom for a while too. So it was brutal and just miserable. And to back up a little bit, I was a youth pastor before I moved to Texas, and then kind of was like, no, I can't. I've been in ministry my whole life. Mm-hmm. I need to kind of set out on my own, because my dad was a pastor, so I grew up in the church, and I knew it, and I had some experiences as a youth pastor that were just brutal for a 23-year-old to have to deal with, from grown men, shall we say, within the church, because the church is not perfect. It's full of sinners.
Right.
And I was like, I'm done. Like, I'm done. Right. I'm going to go teach. That can be, and I told myself this lie, that it could be my ministry, right? You don't have to do ministry inside a church. You rationalize things all the time. And so I did. And so you can call that running or whatever, from calling and all of that. And so I'm miserable in Michigan with this job, and all of a sudden I get a message on Indeed.com from the chaplain recruiting office. Hey, we saw your resume. I had my master's in theology. Would you be interested in becoming a chaplain? And the moment that I saw that message, I thought back to 5 years previously when I left the church, because before I went to Texas, one of my first thoughts was, why don't I just leave the church ministry, go be an Army chaplain?
Yeah.
Like I've always had an affinity for the military. When 9/11 happened, I was a freshman in high school. I still remember the day. I'm sure you still remember the day, that it happened. And thought, if things picked up and they really popped off, that I wouldn't really have a choice.
Right.
Like I just kind of like was resigning myself to the fact that at 18 I'd be going into the military. But then it didn't pop off to that extent, and so the allure of college sports took over my desire to go into the military, and then I just never pursued it. But it was always in the back of my mind. My great uncle served in World War II. My grandfather served during the Korean War. My uncle on my dad's side served during Vietnam. There's now a generation of Rileys and Askerons that have not served the country, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of felt, in a way, kind of a bit of a burden in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I got that message, I was like, okay, check with Jess. I said, hey, I told him I would think about this, but I just want to run this by you.
Yeah.
I got a message from the Army's chaplain corps about being a chaplain. What do you think? And when I say without hesitation, Coleman, I mean, literally, I'm pretty sure I had just put the question mark on the end of that sentence, and she goes, you absolutely need to do this. And I was like, okay, if there's any more validation than that, I don't know what it is, right? But the moment that she said that, something changed, right? That miserable feeling that I had because what I was doing at that school seemed purposeless.
Mm-hmm.
Now I had something of purpose that I was going to be doing.
Yeah.
But it was even bigger than that because, okay, now I'm back in ministry again. Right?
Yeah.
And so personally, it allowed me to, okay, now it's time to get like, if you're going to be going into the military, like, while this process is going on, it's time to start getting disciplined.
Yeah.
Like, even more than you may be now. Like, I was never one for physical fitness, right? I just, after I was done playing sports, I was just kind of done.
Yeah.
You know, I would play pickup ball or whatever, but I would never, like, I'm not a gym rat.
Right.
But now it's time to be a gym rat, right? Like, we got to get in shape. So it gave me a personal, like, purpose, but then it also reconnected me with ultimately what my calling is.
Yeah.
Which is to minister to people. And as we've gone through and as my career in the reserves has, progressed, and we come back from NTC and things go very, very well there. And I get to tell Jess about those stories. She goes, it just comes naturally.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, because it's exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, right? Like, yeah. So the military for me is, it's a familial thing in a lot of ways, right? Like, there's that, there's now a generation that has served and has served in my family line since at least World War II. Right. But it's also a spiritual thing of like, hey, like, these soldiers are my soldiers. They're my flock to take care of, regardless of, like, the fact that I may not even get to see them face to face within the year.
Right.
Like, they're still my guys and girls to take care of and make sure that they have everything that they need to be, connected spirit. I mean, thankfully the Army recently has come out and said, hey, one of our, one of our factors for readiness, one of our dimensions for readiness Yes, there's physical fitness. Yes, there's emotional and mental fitness, and there's social fitness, and there's family fitness. But that fifth dimension is spiritual fitness.
Right.
Because the Army sees everybody, regardless of their faith tradition, as a spiritual being.
Right.
And, I mean, if there's nothing more validating for our profession than that,
Yeah.
I don't know what is.
I,
And so, like, I'm like, I know we have our jokes, and it's the government and the Army and whatever, but
yeah.
like, the military is something that's very important to me specifically.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's the.
And let me cut in real quick, because
sure.
to double down on that, like, it's important to me because of exactly what you said. It is that service to something other than yourself.
Yeah.
Which gives that purpose.
Yeah.
Now you may continue.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, the other kind of impacts of being in the military, the legacy side of it, again, yeah, I had two grandfathers that served World War II, then a generation that didn't have anybody, and then both my brother and I served, and then I had three cousins as well. So, in that next generation that served. So there's a part of that, and there's the other impact of, I mean, obviously my life would not be the same without it, because how God ordained everything to fall into place the way that it did, so that I would meet my wife, that we would have our children, that we would be here having this podcast. Because
correct.
I mean,
correct.
There's so many other threads that pull through that. The other thing that I would say, and this kind of goes with what I'm saying earlier with the framework and such, but it is that spiritual dimension of, one of the first things that I realized when I was in basic training was the drill sergeants and just the Army standard itself was going to push you to your breaking point, and probably even push you farther than that. Demand a standard that you might not meet at the moment, but they will get you to it and stuff. But what that started to kind of cultivate in my mind was there. This is another distinction between the military and the church, that the military is going to push you to reach standards, and oftentimes, especially in basic training, when those things aren't met, there's punishment that's involved. And so whether it's remedial PT, whether it's, extra duty, doing whatever, or, re-cleaning your weapon that you've cleaned 15 times already, or
scrubbing the barracks floor with your toothbrush.
Yeah, we never had to do that, but we did. I mean,
you didn't
we
have to Forrest Gump it?
No, not with our toothbrushes, but I mean, you had to clean it every night. So, it was like, but, what that taught me was that there needs to be grace, not for the military, but that not that there needs to be grace. It taught me the value of grace, I guess, because you realize God's standard for us is so much higher than what these drill sergeants are putting on us. I mean, it is, if you think the wrong thing, that's damnable.
Right.
And all of a sudden you go,
right, but
he paid for that.
Yeah.
He did it perfectly for me. And so you start to see this, and that, and that led to, there were certain frustrations with the military, and like, okay, why is this the standard? But at the same time, it also taught you, okay, while this is a very law-heavy institution, and it has to be, because you're dealing with life and death there, you start to see the church, those who over which Christ is the head, as this institution of grace. That this is, you're your slightest imperfections should cut you off from God eternally. But instead, in his great mercy, he has said, my son's going to do it perfectly for you. And he's going to give that to you as a gift. And so I guess that was the big kind of revealing thing in particularly my enlisted side, this recognition of grace. And I don't think I would have come to that without having had the
So
harshness.
much law.
Right, exactly. So,
but isn't that the beauty of law and gospel?
It is.
The Lutheran Church is so well versed in teaching.
Correct.
And I would argue from the outside looking in, more churches should be better versed in teaching. You think about Veterans Day, right? And like where we're at, what we have done. I mean, you obviously have a much different resume than I have when it comes to our military service, but we still have the same purpose when it comes to that service, right? It's to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies that are foreign and domestic. So we're kind of towards the end a little bit. Anything else that we want? I know Veterans Day also shares a little connection with Saint Martin of Tours. Tours, that's right.
Tours, yeah.
Which is also a military award for chaplains.
Correct. For that reason, yeah. So, yeah, this is I always like this, So, the tradition in the old church, I'll throw this in first. So, the Saint Martin of Tours, his feast day, so the festival day which you celebrated Saint Martin of Tours, is November 11th. That's the side note to that is that's why Martin Luther is named Martin Luther, because he was born on November 10th and he was baptized on November 11th, and the tradition was whatever day you were baptized on, you got the name of that saint that was celebrated at that time. So that's how Martin Luther that's how he got his name.
Yeah.
But Saint Martin of Tours, the reason he is sainted in the Catholic Church, we would call him a saint because he believed in Christ, not because he did anything special. But the legend has it that he was out. He was a soldier. He was a general, or pretty high up there, in the Roman army, and was out one night and saw, and he had been kind of, it had been not fully converted to Christianity yet, but was exposed to it, and he had if I remember that detail might not be correct, but anyways, he saw a beggar out on the road, and he took his cape, that is one of his cloaks that he had as a soldier, cut it in half and gave it to this beggar because the beggar was cold. Supposedly that night he had a dream, and it was Jesus appearing to him with his same cloak, with the cloak that he had given to the beggar, and he was quoting Matthew, what you've done for the least of these, you've done for me. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, maybe he was a Christian already, but at that point he left the army and then went on to go study more theology and such. Now, could be fuzzy on those things, but the cape part is the important part, the cloak that he gave to the beggar. This became a relic, and again, got a whole slew of issues with that, but it was kept in battle as this relic because he was sainted, and the person who kept that cape became known as the capella, which is, if we would pronounce it in English, the chaplain.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is why one of the, maybe not the highest, but a pretty significant award that a chaplain could win or be awarded, not win, but be awarded, is the St.
St.
Martin.
Martin tours.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which we have actually seen presented to a chaplain.
Correct. Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I don't know that, I mean, the 11th day, 11th hour, the 11th month, Armistice Day into World War I, and then recognizes Veterans Day later, if it had anything to do with that, but it is just if it's not, it's divine providence. And,
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Way to throw the theological term in there, because I was about to say the C word and then get yelled at by my Lutheran buddy over here.
Yeah.
Coincidence.
Providence, baby. Providence.
I know.
Yeah.
My theology does not allow for coincidences.
Exactly. So,
which is good. No, so, yeah, it is. It's so cool. I mean, just in the way, whether that is the reason or the providence, like just the fact that those things lined up is pretty cool. Yeah. Pretty cool. So, celebrate Veterans Day tomorrow, the 11th day of the 11th month. Make sure you thank a veteran for the service that they have given to this country to protect the freedoms that we all enjoy. And if you have any interest in military service, contact a recruiter.
Yeah.
This is not an ad, but we're just saying contact a recruiter.
And there is because there it is a life. I mean, it will change your life.
It will 100%. And whether you're a civilian like I was or someone who chose to enlist like Coleman was, it will impact your life. And again, we are not spokesmen for the Army. We are not paid advertisements here or anything. Right. We're just saying, like, we serve and we want to serve with people who want to serve too.
And we need good men and good women to serve.
Correct.
And I will especially say good men, not to take away from our ladies, but men, that's what we are. Those are the gifts God has given us to protect and provide, not only for our family, but for the community.
Train, serve, and love.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. All right. Well, that is going to do it for us on the Two Chaps Pod. On this Veterans Day episode, he's Coleman, and I'm AJ. We will see you guys next week. Thank you so much for listening, subscribing, and liking on all social media platforms. And until next week, remember to stay uncultured. Hey everybody, just want to thank you once again for spending some time with the Two Chaps Pod today. If you're on YouTube, make sure that you've liked and subscribed to our channel. Pound that bell for notifications so you can be notified when our latest content drops. If you're on social media, we are all over the place, including the brand new Threads from Meta. And I do want to remind you, for longer content, including pre-show and post-show audio, make sure you've subscribed on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. We'll be back next week with a new episode of the Two Chaps Pod, and until then, stay uncultured.